Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'm discussing my thoughts on episode 19 of the anime series ClassicaLoid, the second season, and I loved this episode. It pretty much gave me everything that I was hoping it would, as far as recollecting back to the real-world composers Schubert and Mozart, respectively, in their having been pitted together in hilarious fashion in this episode. I had talked about the PV for this episode attached to the previous, about how I was getting a real odd couple vibe, and that was thoroughly the vibe riding all the way through this episode. You know, they're antagonistic to each other. Mozart is doing it just because that's how he is. He's aloof. He doesn't have any agenda. He's not pointedly trying to stick it to Schubert necessarily. He kind of just behaves that way with everyone. But, you know, there are times when he does get a jab in. He arcs his butt up in the elevator when it's stopped and farts in Schubert's face. Such like that. And that's just his humor. That's just the, you know, the aloofness, the oafishness of his character. And Schubert, it's breaking every last one of his nerves. I mean, the whole aspect of how they became entangled, literally. You know, Mozart's hair got caught on one of the buttons on Schubert's jacket, and he's like, well, why don't you change your clothes anyway? You could just take the jacket off. The whole adventure, the whole misadventure of the episode could have literally ceased in the early going if Schubert just wouldn't have been so begrudging and taken his own coat off. You know, let Mozart walk around carrying the coat until he can, you know, figure out how to get his hair taken out of the buttonhole or whatever. And it's kind of hilarious because this all was, you know, instigated by Kanai's not being able to go to Moz. Moz just sort of disappeared from Ottawa Manor. So usually she would go to him and send him out on a shopping quest, you know. Get me these groceries. Eggs are on sale. I want to get them. You know, it's 1 carton per customer. And there's a limited time, so make your way straight there and back. And but Moz was unavailable. So she goes to the next available ClassicaLoid, Schubert, and entrusts him with this grand exalted journey to the shopping mart. And you just knew all hell was going to break loose. Even if you didn't see the PV and know that they were going to get sidled up together forcibly throughout the stretch of the episode, you knew some havoc was going to ensue somehow, by some means. Because she makes the point, you know, you just kind of disappear every once in a while. A kite will come along and take you to Africa or something. You'll get abducted by aliens. I don't necessarily know you're going to be around, you know. If I said, yeah, you might not come back. But, you know, for failing Mozart being there, she entrusts this with Schubert, and of course he runs into Mozart, who is flirting with the ladies as per his wont, as per usual. And when he hears how much confidence, as Schubert's you know, sort of passing the buck, that Kanai had in him and sending him out on this journey to get those eggs and everything, I think Mozart is kind of like, his eyebrows arc, and I think he's kind of like, oh, really? Like, that's usually what I would be doing. Okay, well, let's go along. Like, you know, he kind of feels slighted, I think, because he wasn't there for Kanai to come to him, you know, as she normally would. And the journey ensues, the havoc ensues. They stop off to get, like, you know, an orange juice, an extra large orange juice. And I absolutely love the edit, the dead, like, all sound stops when the, you know, the clerk giving them the juice is like 280 yen. And Mozart just looks over at Schubert with this ear-to-ear grin, like, expectantly, you're paying for this, right? He doesn't say anything. The sound stops, and he just looks at him expectantly, and Schubert's kind of like, what? You expect me to pay for this? Which apparently he does. You know, it's one of a few occasions in the episode where Schubert just kind of like bends to Mozart's, you know, unflinching will, especially when they're in the elevator. And Schubert recalls back to a movie he had been watching where, you know, you could get up through the crawl space if you're trapped in an elevator and try to, you know, reach the next floor up or whatever like that, which they do and they succeed at doing. But Schubert's like, when Mozart's like, okay, well, you hold me up, you prop me up, and I'll try to, see if I can open the ceiling of the elevator. And Schubert's like, why should I be the one? I came up with the idea. I'm going up first. And then immediately they cut to him being down on all fours, helping Mozart, So, I mean, that whole dynamic between them, it was actually really expertly done and exactly what I wanted. But as I say, I love the fact that they recollected back, in Schubert's case, to the comparisons made to him between his work and Mozart's, and how he, was so just begrudging over that fact, the constant comparisons, the constant, oh, you're just a copycat, and all of these really dismissing appraisals of his work and such like that. And there are some really heartening, almost mindless, absent-minded, in Mozart's case, really some heartwarming words of approval where, like, at one point Mozart says, I really like your music. But then he goes off on another, like ADD or ADHD. He's like, oh, look at the splatter on the floor. It looks like a chicken. And such like that. And then he has this crushing realization, Schubert, you don't like me? I don't think you like me. And this happens twice. They have a full discussion, a full dialogue, which is what I think prompted, Schubert's recollecting back and the flashback to the real world composer. And then when he sort of snaps back to in the moment, Mozart isn't even paying attention. He's just looking at the chicken stains or the liquid spots on the floor that look like chickens. And moments like that. And then, of course, there is a moment of clarity for Schubert as well, where after they get themselves entangled, they get out of the elevator, but then they're locked in a, woman's change room. They hide in one of the lockers. I had a feeling that's what was going to happen. But eventually they're caught. They end up out on, the balcony, or not really a balcony, but they go out the window. They're up on like the 6th floor, and they have no way of escaping. A whole bunch of, waiters or whatever like that have been called for help, and they're all trying to, they're raising their fists at them out the windows. And Schubert becomes sacrificial. He's like, well, because of the rapport you have with my senpai, because of the fact that you have this familiarity with him, you have nicknames for each other. That's how familiar with each other you are and how close you are. He has a appropriation of all of that in his mind, of what that all really amounts to. As Mozart explains, it's just kind of a thing that really came from Kanai's father, if I remember correctly. When he revived them or brought them out of stasis, he sort of told them, well, you're going to call each other these informal names, so you can have a familiarity with each other, so you can sort of be friends, And, as we see in this episode, tacking on to that, they decided to modify that to their own preferences. It would be Lukun and it would be Wolf instead of, whatever nicknames Kyoga had given them to call each other. And Schubert, it was just another aspect of Schubert's jealousy because of how much he holds up on a pedestal Beethoven. And so he felt in that moment where they had to escape, the one who means more to the world, but even more importantly, more to my senpai, is probably you, who's much close enough to have a nickname that you two refer to each other as. And he's about to, just jump off so Mozart can he's going to summon his music and have Mozart become a baby and everything. And I'm like, I'm kind of listening to this plan, and I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't think this is going to work out for you, Shub. But then I love, again, sort of the heartwarming comeuppance of Mozart in that moment. He's like, no, let's save both of us. And he summons forth a music rendition, a contemporary rendition of his oboe concerto. And they turn into ducks, and they literally fly home for the winter, or at least to the shopping mart where they were on their way the whole time. And they get there too late, of course. They don't get the on-sale eggs. Kanai is completely fine with it, all told. She's like, oh, it's perfectly fine. I understand. Oh, so that's what you were getting up to. And yeah, don't worry about it. I'll just ask Mozart to do it next time. The crushing blow to Schubert. He can't win. Even in, there's one last moment of clarity for him where he just about calls Mozart a genius for getting him out of that predicament, for summoning forth that oboe concerto, getting them out of trouble and flying to the supermarket. And he almost damn near calls him a genius. He has such a, sudden change in his appraisal, but it's one of those things where it's not so much a change in his appraisal of Mozart, but it's reflecting on, this is the real admiration he has for Mozart. He's always had for him. Mozart's affable character, is always getting into trouble, playing pranks, farting in people's faces and everything, makes him unlikable to Schubert. But the artiste, the composer, the genuine artist, the compositions, these are things that Schubert admired and admires. And in that moment, you get the barest perception that he's in touch with that again. And then, like I say, it's all undermined by the fact that Kanai's just like, okay, well, forget you, Schub. I'm going to go with Mozart next time again. So he can't win. Schubert can't win. But I absolutely loved the rapport and the dynamic between them. That entire sequence where Schubert is calling back on how much Beethoven means to him, not only in the here and now, but as the former composer, really touching upon the closeness of them in the real world, and being at Beethoven's bedside when he was dying, and later himself recollecting back, and he had, per somebody who was going back and forth in the comments with me on several videos ago now, they were telling me Schubert is actually buried next to Beethoven in the cemetery that they're both buried in, which was as per his request. He requested to be buried next to the Grand Master Beethoven, and that's where they both rest side by side. And it's really kind of heartwarming and touching to be in touch with that knowledge, adding to the layers of the fictional side of things with the ClassicaLoids, but so much of that carries over into the show, into the plot, into the characterization. Even though these are ClassicaLoids, they're crazy, absurdist, fictionalized versions of these composers and things like that. The showrunners and the directors and the plotters, they really take a lot of inspiration, actual real-world history inspiration, that they employ and implant into the characters of the ClassicaLoids. And to see in that moment, again, there were just a lot of moments of clarity along those lines for Schubert in this episode, where he was recollecting back and trying to summarize in words to try to equate to Mozart, who wasn't listening anyway, but just how important Beethoven is to him, just how much he looks up to him, idolizes him. And, in that fleeting moment where they're backed against the wall, literally, overlooking a 6-story drop, Schubert, even then, he feels it's not so much he wants to be selfless, like out of kindness or anything like that. It's sort of, his own self-hate, his own lack of self-worth in that moment, thinking Mozart is somehow better than him. And so it would make more sense to him in that moment to make every effort to save Mozart rather than himself. And he's always going to be put upon. He's always just not going to win, and I feel so bad for him. But I laughed my ever-loving ass off during the course of this episode. I was really moved by the heartwarming recollections and flashbacks, and it was practically pitch perfect. It was about as good as an episode of ClassicaLoid can get, for me, for my tastes. And I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 19 of season 2 of ClassicaLoid, if you've seen it as well, if you enjoyed it as much as I did, if you enjoyed the insights and everything like that, and appreciated just the whole relationship that unfolded as it did so between the both of them, and whether or not you're happy or sad, disappointed, whatever like that, that they kind of grew closer, but then it went back to status quo by the end. They will forever be adversarial. Such like that. Our POVs can certainly disagree. If you don't share any of my, thoughts or opinions on this particular episode, let me know why in the comments. And so yeah, otherwise that'll be pretty much it for me on this. If this video finds you well, I'll catch you all later. Peace.